How's everybody this wonderful morning? Well, you know, changeless and wealthy is a kind of an interesting topic. And, you know, I've known Patty a long time. And, you know, that which is operating through her is changeless and constant and provides a wealth of opportunity if it's explored. And I can tell you, watching her over the years, that that which is within her is still changeless, but because she's explored it, the wealth of her talent and abilities continue to keep coming out and are absolutely amazing. It was wonderful, Patty. Thank you. It was just great. And what a great example for what I'm going to talk about today. So we're talking about the laws of manifestation, and what that is the basic spiritual principles and law that we use to bring into form our greater good. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to start out by reading what Dr. Holmes says about the changeless reality on page 184 of the Science of Mind textbook. He said that spirit is changeless reality. That which we call personality is the instrument through which spirit operates. But spirit can operate for the individual only by operating through him. Spirit is never bound by the form it takes and is not affected by any apparent cause or condition, but is forever free. The Spirit not only fills all forms, but surges around them and through them. We are dealing with an impersonal principle. It will operate for one just as quickly for another. Always expect good. Have enthusiasm and, above all, a consciousness of love. A radiant feeling flowing through your consciousness at all times. Treat yourself until you have an inner sense of unity with all good. And so, you see, this idea of changeless is the consistency of spiritual principle and law and scientific principle and law. For example, gravity works the same here as it does in China. There's no specific difference in gravity. I fell in China when I was there, and I've fallen here. And you go down. That's how gravity works. You don't fall up. Have you noticed that? Okay? So there are principles, electrical principles, all kinds of principles in law, just like spiritual principle in law that are change. The law of growth, sowing and reaping. It works, doesn't matter what. It still works. It's been working for thousands and thousands of years and will continue to work. And those principles, when understood inside of ourselves and worked, is what wealth is all about, in my opinion. So if you have an understanding of spiritual principle, can apply it and work it in your life consciously, regardless of all the other distractions we have, then you are wealthy because you can create a wealth of wonderful experience. Wealth in itself is, in the dictionary, it says it's the opposite of destitution, which is good. Anybody felt destitute in the last little while? I think we all have off and on, don't we? Yeah, and so obviously when you're in destitution, you're not in wealth. But it's an abundance of valuable resources or material possessions. So, and again, it's about the utilization of these. And so a lot of people don't get past material possessions. They think that that's what wealth is all about. And yes, it is about one thing, but it's about, as what the dictionary says, an abundance of valuable resources. And there are resources available to everyone and to anyone to experience a greater good in life. One of my passions is experiencing the resources of the Canadian Rockies. And so what I want to do is, I'll talk a little bit more of that as we go along. But what I want to do is I want to talk about positioning your mind into a consciousness of wealth and developing a consciousness of wealth and what that means. And so one of the first things that happens when we have a good idea is we go about looking at it and why I can't do that. Or we look at what other people are doing and say, oh, I wish I could do that, or I wish I could do this. And a lot of times we can end up becoming resentful or hurt or feeling insignificant or not valuable and feeling like we can't create our own good. And so that is the negative use of the law, because all that will do through consistent thinking is continue to demonstrate experiences that prove us right. Because this is the neat thing about this practical, provable philosophy we have. You always get to be right. Don't you like that? Always. Some people say, no, I like being wrong. You get to be right about being wrong. So keep in mind, you always get to be right. So that's one thing that's very important to know. The question is, what do you want to be right about? That's the question. Okay? What do you want to be right about? So you've got to work with what you've got. It's not about what you don't have, it's about what you do have, and to work with what you got with an attitude of gratitude. 15 years ago, I went through one of the most traumatic experiences of my lifetime. And I've had a lot of really interesting experiences, but that one was having a total breakdown and losing everything that I had. I mean, everything. I still have my car, but it had 435,000 K on it, all of which I put on, and it was clicking on its last legs. And so I was feeling a little destitute. And one of the things that Spirit said to me is, Doug, you've got to move out of that position and work with an attitude of gratitude to be grateful for what it is that you do have, not what you don't have. And it's not about the big things, it's about simple things. So there I was one day, if you ever been up to Lake Louise, which I think most people have, everybody been there, and you're standing out overlooking the lake, the first mountain on the left there, the big one, is called Fairview Mountain. And I was sitting at the top of Fairview Mountain one day. There I had just gone through losing my ministry, bankruptcy, and losing all my assets and everything, and quite destitute. But this is where I was, and I was sitting up there when this idea come to me about what wealth is really about. And I had gone through all of that, and this voice was saying to me, but Doug, you're wealthy. And I go, no, I'm not. I got nothing. How can I be wealthy? Look below. And I looked at all the people there, and I realized those folks have come from other countries, and they're paying thousands and thousands of dollars to come up and stand there and look at the beautiful resources that the Rocky Mountains provide. And there it is. And here I am up at the top looking at them and looking at all those resources, just spectacular up there. And you know what it cost me? I had to have lunch anyhow, so I had my lunch packed. It cost me a tank of gas, not even that, to get from Calgary to Lake Louise. And I felt like I was one of the richest people in the world. I didn't have nothing. But wealth is taken in context to the situation that you're in. What a beautiful, beautiful experience that was. And I became grateful. And that was one of the things that in my own recovery for a 9-month period that I worked with. And I kept a little log that year because I spent a lot of time exploring in the mountains. And I did 765K hiking, which is a substantial amount. Most of which I did by myself, with nobody else around. I always did that anyhow, so I like being out there. And that was the most wealthiest I've ever been in my life, I felt. Because, you know, sometimes when you start getting money and stuff like that, it can be a distraction from what real wealth is all about. Because then we transfer our perception to the money and not to the experience. This summer was another experience of wealth that come into my mind when I was a young man. And what come into my mind was my father never took us on only one holiday the whole time I remember, because he'd spent several years in combat in Burma and India flying an airplane, and in Europe after flying for the military. And he didn't want to do any traveling, so he didn't do any traveling. But I always had a dream about going to Disneyland, and I made a promise to myself at that time that I would take all my children and all my grandchildren to Disneyland. And so this summer we had an opportunity to take 6 of our 9 grandchildren to Disneyland. We took 2 4 years ago, but this one was set in our 10-year travel plan, and it was set 9 years ago. This was year 8, and we set that. And it was set there, written in stone, and we worked towards that. And the greatest joy I got, and how I felt so wealthy, wasn't because of the funds to do it. It was because of the experience. And I've got this picture of myself and the 6 grandchildren standing in front of the Mickey Mouse ears with Disneyland in the background. And that was worth $1 million to me. Okay? That made me feel like one of the wealthiest people in the world. So wealth is really taken in context to your situation. Work with what you've got. You got to learn to work with what you got. It's not about what you don't have, it's about what you do have and how you go about charting it. And what you've got to remember, that whatever you put your energy and intention into will actually come about sooner or later. Notice I said sooner or later. I didn't give you any specific time, because it doesn't matter what time frame I've set on it usually. It always happens on a different time frame, a lot of it. Okay? It'll come into your experience sooner or later. And if you have a really strong desire for fulfillment of something, not only will that happen, but Spirit has a very interesting way of giving you an abundance of other activities that go along with that. So I said we set down a 10-year travel plan for adventure, and we had one particular aspect that we were going to do every year. And that was it. That's all we'd planned. So there's 2 things about that. I'll get back to the planning part later. But the one thing about it is our idea was to have adventure through experience. And everybody does their own thing in wealth. That's different, you know. Doesn't matter. Some people just like making money and having money. My brother's really good at that. He loves that. He's wealthy. But his wealth is measured in his ability to make his money and have that. And he likes that. That's his joy. Okay? Mine, I like adventure. I like different experiences. So this year, I didn't have the opportunity to have one adventure. I had 9 adventures. And I was out of town for 50 days doing all kinds of different things. One week, we were in Alaska, and I was at the Sawyer Glacier taking pictures with my toque and gloves on. And the next week, I was sitting in Wrigley Field in Chicago watching the Cubs and the Cincinnati Reds play baseball. Whew, just like that. Okay? Just like that. And it happened because, not because I have a lot of money, but because I have a consciousness of wealth. And it is so interesting how these things come about that one could have never have imagined. But when you start where you are with what you've got and what you can do and begin to move towards it, then the rest of the how-tos come along. And that's the part that we got to get real clear on if we're working with principle and the idea of wealth. You see, a lot of us get really good ideas about what we want and then what we're going to do when we get there. So we have an idea about that. However, the big problem is most of us don't know how we're going to do it. So, because we don't know how we're going to do it, we never get started because I don't know how to do it. I got to tell you, I haven't known how to do anything that I've ever really done and accomplished that was great. I've never known how to do it all, how to get it. I know what I wanted, And I had the idea and the desire, but I didn't know what was all required. Okay? Because you don't need to know that. It's not your job. We have to be real clear on what our job in the creative process is. Our job is to have an idea, set the destination, be willing to start where we are with what we have and what we can right now, and then we nurture it and we do the activities along the way that we're given to do. That's what the process is. But the activities along the way, that growth process, is the Spirit that's working through us. And it can't work through us if I say, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to do this, I can't do that. It works through us by saying, okay, we're doing this, and I'm open and receptive to good ideas. W. Murray in the Scottish expedition, and I'll paraphrase what he said that until one is committed, until one takes action, nothing happens. But once one does, then providence moves and brings all kinds of people's circumstances and situations to him that would have never otherwise happened. And they were successful in their Everest expedition. So let's take it back to something a little bit more simple and something how we can grasp so we're clear about what our job is and what the Spirit's job. So we're getting ready for the season of reaping, the fall. But let's go back to the spring. What was our job? Our job was to prepare the soil. Our job was to select the seed. Our job was to plant it. And then all we did was nurture it and take care of it. And then our job is to go reap it. But how many people take an active part in growing that seed into a plant? Nobody. Well, why don't we? Because it's not our job. It's not our job. We don't know how it happens anyhow. Well, we could kind of explain the process, but how does that happen? How does that growth take place? I had a wonderful experience about a month ago. I took 4 of the grandchildren out to Stanley Glacier, which is just a little bit past Boom Lake inside of Kootenay National Park. And in the early 60s, a great big wildfire raged through that area right up Storm Mountain and burned everything. I remember them recruiting people off the streets of Banff, buses loads they were taking out there to fight the fire back in those days. And then all the growth come back, and then 3 years ago it went through again, whew, just in that area by Stanley Glacier, and wiped it out. So you never know what kind of a trip you're going to have. So we're walking along there, we've got the grandchildren, and we stop. And I explained to them about the 2 different fires and the fireweed that's growing. You see, fireweed needs that the ashes from the fire in order to fertilize the soil for it to grow. And then I was showing them all the trees that were growing, and they're pine trees. Now, you know, we've been decimated in that area with the pine tree beetle. They don't kill the spruce trees, but they do the pine. So all the pine trees had been killed, and all the trees had been burned. And then when it grows, it isn't the spruce trees that grow, it's the pine trees that grow. Everywhere where there's a forest fire you look, it'll be pine trees. No, they don't plant them. There may not have been any there for 40 years. So it's the heat from the forest fire that cracks the shells on the seed of the pine seeds that allows the pine tree seed to take root and to grow into fulfillment. Okay, so a lot of people don't know that. But it was a wonderful opportunity for me to talk to the grandchildren about the natural process of wildfires and what happens. Yeah, it kills everything there, but it brings life to it also, you see. And so there's a natural sequence. It's not planned. This is just the way it is. And so for you and I coming back to it, we select the seed, we nurture the soil, and we reap it. But that process in the middle of growing is none of our business. And even if we want to make it our business, it's pretty hard to figure out what's going on and how that happens. And you know, you and I are smart enough to know that if the seeds have been planted, we don't wait 2 or 3 weeks and go out and dig them all up to see if they're growing. Anybody do that? Why? Well, if you're out there and digging them up and your neighbor says, well, what are you doing? Well, I'm just seeing if their seeds are growing. They might think that you were a little bit off, wouldn't they? In fact, you might think you're a little bit off. So we have to remember that. That's really critical. And it's critical in our journey too, because I don't know all the steps that are necessary for me to do what it is that I need to do, but I got started on it. So it's important that we allow that process to happen. And we may not get everything right away. I remember when I was given this idea by Spirit to do a prosperity class, and I was walking along in the mountains 15 years ago, just after I'd gone through all of that devastating experience. And this voice says to me, Doug, you're going to do a prosperity class someday. And I'm going, oh yeah, that's a pretty wild thought. I thought I was losing it. How can you do a prosperity class when you've lost everything and you went bankrupt? How can you? And that's the question I asked. How can I do that? And then the voice said, well, you're already half done. And I had no idea what that meant. It took me 2-3 years of reflecting on it before I got a deep understanding of it. That's part of the class I'm going to be doing. Okay? And so all the way along, I was given a little bit to take and to digest. And it was 11 or 12 years later, and I'm saying, when am I going to do this thing? And then that voice came back and said, you'll know the right time. It'll be clear. And so I just left it. And one day I was down in Kalispell, Montana, and the minister in the church there after I did a Sunday service said to me, Doug, would you be interested in coming down and doing a class on prosperity? There it was. And that's the first time I did it. But it was after 11 years of working with the ideas that I was given. And lo and behold, the voice was right. I was already half done when I lost everything, which is an interesting one. But one of the other ideas here that's really important in advancing your experience into having a wealth of experiences, and however you want to experience it, is to get into the idea that Zig Ziglar gave me when I was in a seminar he did a number of years ago. And the idea he gave me, I really use. I work with my business students on it all the time. They all hear it, every one of them, and more than once. Failing to plan is planning to fail. And when you start the planning process, it works. So I have this real neat planning process that I do. By the way, Ann and I met 2 weeks ago to have breakfast because the summer's over and we're planning next year's adventures. So one of the things I did was, how do I plan to take 6 grandchildren to Disneyland, 2 cars driving, 3 of the people flying in, having 6 adults, 6 children, booking 3 motel rooms here, 2 there, on the road, on the way back, and all of the attractions in Southern California. So I have a system that I did. Didn't know how I was going to do it, didn't know how it was going to work out, but we buy a board. And first is, it's all squared off, and then we put in pencil, different ideas and different dates and different experiences that we want to have. Distances to travel by car, when people are flying in, flight numbers, confirmation numbers, hotel, and what activities on what day. All in pencil. Okay, that goes up there. I'll have ours up for next summer. Next week. At least the frame, I won't have anything in it yet, but we're still working on that, okay? And then as things become clear, move them around in pencil, and once they're booked and reserved, then you've got something that looks like this. Okay? Now, one of the important parts about planning is not to be a control freak. Uh-oh, how do you do that? How can you plan and not be a control freak? Doesn't this look like this is pretty controlled? It is fairly tight as far as some of the superficial stuff. That was to create a relatively seamless experience, because when you've got 12 personalities and you're marshaling 12 people through Disneyland, 3 days, Universal Studios, and so on, that if you lose anybody or anybody gets out of sync in that, you can have chaos and confusion rather than a great experience. And there are all those things that can come up. So, for example, on our way down, we lost our air conditioning compressor right about 43 above in the desert. But we got there, and within an hour and a half of getting to California, I had the hotel people, Google the dealerships in the area, and I got the car down for an appointment the next morning. So, whenever you plan something, you have to be versatile for those other changes that occur. There's one of the dads flew in with one of the grandsons, and the reason we did it that way is because the one grandson has diabetes #1. And the dad flew in, and they were all excited and pumped, and left the insulin in the fridge back in Canada. Within 24 hours, we had a doctor appointment and a prescription and had the insulin ready to go. He had enough to last. So, but you see, planning is not rigid. Planning is a necessity and a guideline. I had planned originally just to do a few things, but it grew into a whole lot of other extra things that I hadn't anticipated, that were absolutely wonderful. And so when you do that, then you still have to step into the experience, and you still have to be flexible. Which brings me to one of my other key points, which Ann and I work in virtually everything that we do. And this is what we try to do to the greatest of our abilities. And if you work with this one, it'll give you a lot of value and a lot of wealth. No attachment to outcomes. No attachment to outcomes. Expectations of a good experience, because when you're dealing with spirit and you're trying to bring into form something, you have to know that you might not get exactly what it is that you want, but what you get will be better than what it is that you desire. It'll add to the experience, not take away from it. As long as we get, as Emerson said, our bloated nothingness out of the way. As long as we step out of the way with ego and just keep focused on the task at hand, then we can create a wealth of experience and a lot of extra stuff that comes that we didn't know would even happen. And that was an interesting experience, going through Disneyland, 12 people, and never having one person lost for one instant, and not having one delay because nobody respected it. We all respected it, and it was just a phenomenal experience. Oh, hey, with 12 personalities, especially with mine being one of them, it wasn't that there wasn't any conflict. there was a lot of conflict, yeah, and it's just one of those things that's going to happen. You know, with 6 kids, 6 adults, woo-wee. And me being a nice, peaceful, gentle preacher, and one of the fathers being a guard at the remand center. Well, him and I understood each other real well, more so than the rest of everybody did, but that's another story and another lesson. So, no attachment to outcomes. When I went to Chicago, I got off the plane, got back from Vancouver from our Alaska cruise at 2:30 in the morning, and at 11 o'clock at night I was on a plane to Toronto and then to Chicago all night to visit my buddy, a minister down there, Mike Gertis, and got in, and there we were at the airport, went for breakfast. He said, "What are we going to do?" I said, "Well, let's drive towards downtown and see what's going on." Oh, he looks there. He said, "Well, there's a baseball game. The Reds are playing the Cubs in Wrigley Field." I mean, if for baseball, that's iconic. I mean, that was one of the first stadiums. And there I was, behind home plate, watching a baseball game. And I don't get a chance to see very many. I think I've seen 4 in my life, and I saw one in Anaheim with the Angels and the Giants. Wow! did I feel wealthy? Had no idea that that was even there, didn't even cross my mind. But it was just one of those little extras that happened. And so that's one of the key things that we want to do. Dr. Holmes said that God's ideas and attributes are eternal and cannot change. In change is the changeless. In time is the eternal and timeless. In things, the Creator manifests His power and glory forevermore. So the one thing that you could be 100% guaranteed by the changeless is change. That almost sounds like an oxymoron. From the changeless, you could be guaranteed 100% of change. Because the changeless is a consistency of spirit within us. But however, the nature of spirit itself is always in a creative mode. It's always creating something. So therefore, change is the constant in the changeless. And it doesn't matter whether we like change or not. I don't do change very well. I know the process and everything like that. I just don't do it very well. And I go through the process, and when it happens, I'm in this turmoil, and I know it. And I know what's going on, and I still have that happen, and I still need to go through that process. So there is a process that we go through in change. And whether it be a small change or a big change, it's always the same type of thing. There's always an adjustment by the ego of going to the new and letting go of the old, whatever that may be. And that I explore a lot in the program I'm doing this fall. Self-Empowerment and Transformation, Managing Change. So it's always there, and it's always working, and the nature of spirit is change and growth. You can't find anything in this entire physical universe that isn't changing. Oh, you might say, this has been there 1,000 years, but it'll change. And we change in relationship to it. So it doesn't matter whether we like change or not, it's going to happen. What makes a difference is, what is it that we're going to change into? What is the wealth of experience and the wealth of resources that are available to us that we can use right where we are? Oh yeah, it's always nice if you got better cash that gives you more resources. Can anybody use more cash for more resources? And more opportunities? Yeah. It would be nice. However, if you don't have it, what are we going to do? Fold up? Lock ourselves up and say, gee, poor me? No. What we do is look at the resources that we got. Look at what we can do and what we can have. And the key is do it with an attitude of gratitude. Be grateful. There are so many things to be grateful for. One of the things I like to do every morning when I wake up and walk to work or wherever I'm going is take a few minutes to look at what I'm grateful for. Amazing the number of things that we can find. So I know for you, as I know for myself, that there's a deeper understanding and acceptance of wealth and the changelessness of the spirit and the consistency that's always there. And it doesn't matter if you've been nasty for a long time. It doesn't take that long time to straighten that out. You can get it going over a quicker period of time. But where do we got to start? We start right now, where we are, with what we know, and what we have, and what we are, and what we can do. If you're thinking of starting somewhere else, like anybody ever wanted to start on a diet 30 pounds lighter? Got to start where you are. Okay? We got to stay away from what we're not, what we can't have, and what we can't do, because that always creates turmoil and takes us away for our good. So I know for each and every one of us there's an awareness and an understanding that it's key to practice accepting what we can do and what we can have and work with it without any attachment to outcome, knowing that as we move with that, a greater good is ours. And it's ours because we're working with a principle that is true and brings to us what we desire, and there's absolutely no doubt about it that something good will happen. I claim it for myself. I know it for each and every one of us, and we give thanks that it is so, and so it is. Thank you.